Welcome, everyone, to this exclusive LinkedIn Live episode. I'm the moderator for this afternoon, Rei Llazani, and I am joined by three experts in the world of public relations. We have Jason Mudd, the CEO of Axia. We have Karolyn Raphael, the CEO of Winger Marketing. And we have April Mason, the CEO of Violet PR. Thank you for being here, and thank you to our audience for tuning in live as well. There will be a Q&A portion with the audience at the end of this episode. And throughout the episode or at the very end, you could ask your questions directly from the event streaming page or by emailing it to 50 Pros. We'll first start with brief introductions from each speaker to tell a little bit about themselves and the work that they do. Jason, would you like to kick introductions off for us?
Sure, glad to do it. And I'm glad to be here. Thank you for the opportunity, Ray. So my name is Jason Mudd, M-U-D-D. I'm with Axia Public Relations, and we're a PR agency based in Florida, but doing work all over the U.S. And we specialize in helping clients with earned media, social media, and content creation, and more specifically, thought leadership campaigns.
Great. And Karolyn?
Yeah, actually, so Karolyn Raphael with Winger Marketing, and Jason, we do quite a bit of focusing with thought leadership in the B2B world as well. Our bread and butter is B2B PR in the healthcare and logistics industries. And we often act as an outsourced marketing team for many of our mid-size clients. But for enterprise clients, we often act as an extension of their team.
Great. And April?
Hi, I'm April Mason. Violet PR is my agency. We're based in Montclair, New Jersey, but we also have clients all over the country. We're about a 15-person shop. We specialize in economic development as well as architecture, engineering, construction, real estate spaces.
Great.
Ray, we're headquartered in Chicago. So you've got, some East Coast, you've got Midwest. Just wanted to throw that in.
I love that. Yeah, we're definitely getting a nice geographical representation from really everywhere. So hopefully there's going to be a good variety and diverse thoughts here. But that's great. Thank you all. And Jason, we're actually going to start the conversation with you. So you've had your PR agency for 22 years. And the World Communications Forum named you as North America's best PR leader. Could you set the stage for us and tell us how you've seen the PR industry evolve in the past 2 decades and what you think the next decade would look like?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. I might have a little bit of a contrarian viewpoint, but I think PR has not changed that much. We just have better tools to work with than we ever had before as technology continues to evolve. But I think the fundamental foundation of good communication skills, writing skills, and thinking like a strategist still very much apply. And then thinking like a strategist and a good communicator, figuring out which of those technologies and tools will help advance your message to the right audiences. So I think everything that's evolving in our profession is fabulous, but I think at the end of the day, it comes down to the same fundamental set of skills.
Mm-hmm. And what are some of those fundamental skills? If you could expand on that.
Yeah, I mean, the top skills for me are being a great communicator, both oral and written, as well as, being a wise counselor and strategist to your clients. And of course, always thinking about, the ethical use of these tools and the great responsibility that you have.
Great. Love it. In April, your agency focuses on shaping public perception and influencing future outcomes for organizations, among many other things. Could you generally speak on the importance of public relations and why it's going to matter in the next few years?
Wow, big question. Public relations, I think, is going to matter even more over the next few years. Unfortunately, there's been a rise in misinformation, and with fact checking going away, so many conspiracy theorists out there posting information of all kinds on all kinds of platforms. I think it's going to be more important than ever that our clients have clear, correct information, and they're putting it out on their own social channels, on LinkedIn, as well as their website and blog, but also then putting out that that correct information to reporters. And I think the other thing I'll say on that is just with continuing decline in revenues for newspapers, there are not as many great journalists out there that can do the work of the reporting. And so I see our role as really serving as that bridge between the client and the journalist. We play journalists essentially, and collect that great information. We write the stories that end up often being published in national news outlets. So couldn't emphasize the importance of PR more.
Great. And I want to go back to the point that you mentioned. But first, Karolyn, you work really closely with the American Marketing Association. So next question, I think, is going to blend PR and marketing a little bit. But how can PR professionals and marketing professionals measure success beyond just basic media placements? Are there any new KPIs that you see moving forward or any metrics emerging in the industry?
Well, I'll tell you, I've been a very strong advocate and have spoken multiple times at the American Marketing Association about the importance of PR and SEO really working hand in glove. Because those metrics, we recently had a discussion about what metrics do people really want to see, right? What is their return on investment? And you can easily measure what's happening in social media. You can use different tools to measure sentiment, but PR has always been a little squishy. And I think the way that you measure it really, I'm seeing it depends on the size of the business, right? A Fortune 500 company, those executives are used to looking at the numbers where you have what we call AVE or AVE, right? The advertising value equivalency. And they want to see that number because PR is 3 times more credible, more valuable than a paid ad. So there's a formula. We use Meltwater as with our tools. So clients want to see that. But I will tell you that I also have a friend who's a professor at Indiana University, and she said, "Oh my God, I can't believe you're still doing that. That is so outdated, and that is not the way to measure PR." And she was, telling me that this is just something that doesn't even happen in the industry. So, we had a really fun debate on what's happening in academics versus what's happening in real life. But I have found that Google Analytics and being able to trace the funnel and track things with various cookies or UTM codes gives us a much better idea of how things like a press release that's been published on a newswire connects to visits on the website, clicks on your site. So that's how we measure and try to follow the breadcrumbs, if you will, to really demonstrate return on investment.
Great. I love that. April and Jason, do you have any thoughts to add to what Karolyn mentioned? And just to clarify, Karolyn, you said the disagreement that you had with your friend, that was the AVE metric. Is that?
Oh, yeah. She thought that was the most outdated thing. She couldn't believe that I included that in our monthly reports.
So for our audience, could you explain what that is? And yeah.
Yeah, advertising value equivalent. Again, it's really taking what you would have paid for that space in that media outlet, right? How many people it reaches, what you would have paid for that space, and then basically multiplying that number by 3. And then that's how they come up with what the value of those placements are.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Jason or April, do you have any thoughts?
I don't want to speak for April, but I feel confident that we would probably side with your colleague and the academic that AVEs are not considered a credible way to measure. And the best thing I think we can do as practitioners is to educate our clients, even if they're in the C-suite, as to why that thinking is not only, I would say, with all respect, dated, but also, quite frankly, just not a relevant measure and a comparable measure as it might have been decades ago. And I grew up with that whole concept of AVEs, but the industry as a whole is really moving away from that very quickly if it hasn't already. And, there's just other ways and other things to measure, just like Karolyn mentioned, which is using UTM and tracking true analytics and click-through rates, and where possible, tracking where your traffic is coming through, because if I'm selling products or services, my client is in a market that's not influenced by the New York Times or Wall Street Journal, yet they're in that outlet. That looks like a great AVE, but they would never buy media in that outlet if it doesn't reach their target audience. So, again, that's how I grew up in my career. And then, somebody pulled me aside and said, and ever since then, I've been very curious and interested in that. So,
but Jason, the CEOs of these big companies, they're so conditioned that they want
absolutely.
it. Oh, yeah. I mean, it's hilarious.
They're also convinced that, different myths about PR, right? So, there's no such thing as bad publicity. They're conditioned to think that, if we just had the right contacts, we could get whatever story they want published, right? And that kind of thing. So, and then they also think that, great PR looks a lot like advertising. They just didn't have to write a check for it. And that's not true either. So, we see it every day. And I'm glad you brought it up, because there is an opportunity for every person on this session to, make a commitment to, move the ball a little bit forward and plant those seeds, because otherwise, then we're positioning ourselves like a commodity, almost like advertising is. And they can just write a check for advertising instead. And I think that's one of the concerns. If I can just say one more thing, early in my career, when people were poo-pooing AVEs, I really just, in my mind, I thought, well, you know what, that's just because you're not getting a lot of media coverage and you don't want to use that as a metrics, because, we were crushing it and getting a ton of media coverage and our numbers look great. But then I realized it's the equivalency, in my opinion, and it's just my opinion, that it's kind of like a vanity metrics, like measuring, your likes and your comments and your shares. But if nobody actually clicks on your content, nobody actually engages with your brand, then it's just a nice to have, but it doesn't really translate into the business results that your C-suite executives are looking for. So that's just my opinion. April, I don't want to take away from what you have to say.
Well, I will say I lean more toward Jason's viewpoint here, but there have been times when clients ask us for the AVE measurement. We will figure it out and provide it. But as a matter of course, our reports, we do them through Coverage Book, and it spits out data like impressions, circulation. I believe it ranks the website in terms of importance. I find that AVE measure also really hard to figure out if it's a web story. And I know Meltwater probably has a tool, but it used to be that we would actually measure an article in the Wall Street Journal inch by inch, and then we would multiply that by column inches, and that was pretty easy to do.
And that's how we used to get paid, by the column inch.
Yeah. But with so many web stories and then reposts of those stories, it becomes, I think, really challenging to determine AVE. And I would say, I think the best measure is really traffic to a client's website, engagement with a post on LinkedIn, if you share the news stories, things like that. I think if it translates into prospects for them, that then it's working. And sometimes we will look at their Google Analytics. For certain clients, we have access to that back end, or we'll work with their marketing person, and we can see, like, if there was a big New York Times story, we see a spike in traffic to their website. And so I agree, I think, with both of you, that that's probably the best way to know if your PR is working.
And how about if your phone rings and someone says, "Hey, I just read your terrific article in the American Journal of Transportation." You know, I mean, I'd say that's a win.
Completely.
For sure. I would just suggest that if anybody's interested in continuing this conversation, they check out the International Association for the Measurement and Evaluation of Communication, or AMEC, AMECORG.com. We follow and subscribe to their principles there, and they're really leading the industry in the direction of, how to better measure and evaluate communication.
Love that. Thank you, Jason. And April, we're going to go back to you because earlier you mentioned misinformation.
Mhm.
There's statistics that show that the trust in traditional media is declining. And this question is going to go to all three of you folks. But we'll start with you, April, since you brought it up first. How should brands approach reputation management and crisis communication with this trend of declining traditional media in 2025 and beyond?
So the question is, yes, there is a lack of trust in traditional media. I would argue, though, that most traditional media outlets have to follow very set rules in terms of multiple sources and fact checking versus a random blogger or someone that posts consistently on X. So I think that I think that viewpoint is not completely accurate. But I would say if you are a brand, it is up to you to make sure that your company, your organization, your product, that you have correct information and detailed information about yourself on your own website, on all of your own social media channels, on your own blog, and then you're using that information to then also communicate to journalists. And one thing I just worry about a lot is that misinformation getting kind of spit back out by ChatGPT and other AI tools. And then it will just feed on itself. So we as PR people really have to be gatekeepers and fact checkers and make sure we're serving in that role and advising our clients in that way.
Okay. Karolyn, what do you think?
Well, it's interesting because I have a 16-year-old son who got turned on to Joe Rogan. And he's telling me, well, Joe said that I should use this supplement. And of course, he personalized it, not like Joe Rogan actually told him this, but he was listening to this on the podcast. And I said, well, why do you trust Joe Rogan? Why wouldn't you go look up the supplement online, see if it's been FDA approved, see if there's been any studies on it? And he said, well, because Joe knows what he's talking about. And that's all he needed, right? So I think it's a little scary that people are willing to trust others just because they said so. But
yet they won't trust the New York Times or
right. Yes,
CNN.
exactly. So listen, there's always mistakes. People are bound to get something wrong, and I know that many of the organizations, yes, they have cut their fact checkers, and so it's up to the journalist, and they get paid so little to do more and more and more. So I think something big would have to happen in terms of misinformation that made I don't know, maybe like an election come out in a way that you weren't expecting, for people to start to really question, hey, should I really believe everything I'm hearing from random people online? But then you think to yourself, well, who's the source? Who do I go to for the truth? And unfortunately, I think it comes back to almost like a buyer beware. The responsibility lies on the consumer or the person who has read the information to verify it's correct.
Great. Jason, do you have any thoughts?
I think what we're describing basically is influencers are influencing, and there can be good influencers and bad influencers, good influences and bad influences. But yeah, I mean, I think for, my kids are 21 and 19, and they're certainly more interested in, reels and social media influencers or content creators and them influencing their life than they are in traditional news, media. And that's a shame because, like we're describing, there still remains some sort of quality control and fact checking and standards in, these newsrooms, but we're seeing those criterias even get watered down quite a bit. I think someone said earlier, that they need multiple sources for each story, but I'm seeing more and more stories without 3 minimum sources, which we were all trained that have to have. And then it was either earlier this week or last week, I was quoted in an article about, sharing my insights as a public relations practitioner. And then I saw they interviewed one of my colleagues that works in another geographic area of our agency. And he and I both agreed we don't recall seeing a story where two people from one organization were quoted in the same article. That's a normal news story, not a feature story about a company, and how we both were disappointed. One, we didn't know each other was interviewed, right? And two, we were disappointed to see the quality of journalism because we felt like that credibility actually lowered our view of that outlet, our view of that reporter, our view of that story. And we perceive, a cynic's view of reading that same content. And they're like, well, this must be a puff piece for Axia Public Relations. If there are two of, thank goodness there were three, right, sources quoted in this one article. And so we were kind of both mutually disappointed that we were both mentioned in it. But, at the end of the day, I guess we filled a need that they couldn't find elsewhere is one way to position it. But at the end of the day, I'm constantly disappointed in the state of journalism today, and I don't fault reporters for it. I fault ownership. I fault the marketplace and shifting demand and criteria. But I went to the university or to the Missouri School of Journalism, which is considered to be a top journalism school, and the standards that are there just aren't the same anymore. I struggled to pass the grammar exam, which you had to pass in order to get into the journalism school. I recently learned they don't even have a grammar exam anymore. And people who are getting degrees and copy editing have never taken this alleged grammar exam, which for me was very difficult. And I'm a quasi grammarian. So my point is that I think the standards are getting lower, even at the fundamental educational level. And I've had, especially entry-level journalists, disagree with me that they've never heard that you have to have three different sources in a news story. And to me, those are just fundamental things. So I think we have to start early in educating them on why those are important and maintain those standards, not water them down.
Great. And Jason, we're going to stick to you. I think you said it earlier in this episode. You mentioned that the PR landscape, for the most part, has not changed much. It's been the tools that have been changing. So let's discuss a little bit for the next segment about the tools, specifically AI, and what role that's going to play in the PR space. And we'll start it with you, and then we'll go to Karolyn after.
Perfect. So I think the fundamentals of the profession haven't changed, but the arsenal and tools you have at your disposal have changed significantly. And I think that's where a lot of people struggle to keep up is, we're now have tools at our disposal that are 24/7. That one click of the wrong button can alienate your entire audience. You can send the message at the wrong time. You can send a message prematurely. Some junior person on your team, we've had this happen before, can post, their personal thoughts on a client's social media page. It happens, and especially when they're working around the clock and, forgot that they just recently signed into their client's account to post something at 8 p.m. that the client said was urgent. And then at 9 p.m. they're writing about how they're not feeling well and hope to feel better tomorrow, and next thing you know, you've got millions of people seeing something bad like that. But that was years ago, and we've got safeguards in place now from that lesson learned. But generative AI is definitely game changing for the profession. Before we hit record, we were talking earlier, before we went live, we were talking earlier amongst ourselves about how, the workforce today is way more remote and, more importantly, global than it's ever been before. And I was recently speaking at a conference, panelist about PR and AI, and my fellow panelists, they were very openly saying we don't use AI at all at our agency or at our company. And I just stood there sat there in disbelief, what they were telling people in the room, as hand-selected panelists, supposed to be leaders in our industry, that one, they're not using AI because two, they don't think it's a good quality product. Three, they don't think it's ethical. And four, they don't think it's needed. Then these same three individuals proceeded to tell the audience that they don't think AI will replace them. And I thought to myself, it's going to replace you because you don't know how to use it.
That's right.
It reminded me when I was an intern at an ad agency in the PR team. they were outsourcing to a third-party expert company PowerPoint presentations. And I said to them, I can do this. This is so easy. I can't believe you're paying somebody else to do this. And they were, oh no, it's complicated, da, da, da. Well, guess what? When that expert provider ghosted them and didn't have anything to show them when they needed it, guess who they asked to go build that PowerPoint? It was me. And the fact that I was an early adopter of that technology put me in a unique position and built my reputation throughout that organization and beyond. And my point is that it is a global economy, and generative AI is here to stay, and you got to figure out how to use it to be competitive in the marketplace. And you also have to understand how to use it ethically. And, my thought is to those people who aren't using generative AI, you are putting yourself at a disadvantage. And the other point I would make is, because it's a global economy, there's someone sitting somewhere in another country who will eagerly take your position with a spirit and attitude of joy and gratitude, who's willing to work for less, work harder, work more hours, use more tools, and just be open to any training they can receive from an employer because of their eagerness to work for an American company that's paying them what they perceive to be great wages and what we perceive to be, lower wages. And so I really think that wherever you are in your career, you're at a pivotal point, because there's always the cliche, right? When you're on your deathbed, you're going to be replaceable. And sometimes people have to wait till that moment to figure it out. If you're avoiding using technology to do a better job, I think you have an ethical obligation to provide the most efficient experience for yourself and for your employer.
Great. Karolyn, what do you think?
Well, Jason, what you said about this agency sort of boasting about not using AI, it reminds me of, somebody saying, we don't use the internet,
Right.
I mean, I don't know, even if you don't think you're using AI, you are using it if you use Grammarly. Even Google, the way that it has predictive searches based on your searches, it's learning. That is all a language learning model.
Or the Zoom recaps that we now get of our conversations. Yeah.
Now,
it's all AI.
I mean, there are risks with that, right? So you have a meeting with the client, you have a transcription going. Suddenly, everybody who was invited to that meeting gets a copy of that transcription. Well, guess what? Somebody on that list didn't attend the meeting live, so they listened to it later, and somebody else said something not so nice about this other person, and this person, just is, kind of thrown to the side, and so there's a lot of risk that goes with this. So I think, as much as we need to really stay on top of technology, because we're not faxing press releases out anymore, right? So if you're using AI to be part of your brainstorming process, I think the most important thing is that you have transparency with your client, that we are not just dumping something into ChatGPT and posting a blog for you. Like, that is not what we're doing. And I do know there are businesses out there that are trying to leverage AI to just write all their blogs, to do this. And what you'll find is that if you really read the piece, it's terrible. I mean, there are certain AI tools like Claude that do a really great job of coming up with beautiful language, but it doesn't access the internet. So, so it doesn't have the entire data set that ChatGPT does. And it may or may not be true. So again, fact checking falls on you. And I think the other thing, as PR professionals, what we have to keep in mind is, as much as these tools can accelerate our world and allow us to come up with ideas, brainstorm, develop content, it's not going to strategize. It's not going to replace the human piece of strategy. I actually made a prediction that, how in the food industry that you can have an organic stamp on something? I believe we will have something called human certified. That is my prediction. If that comes up, maybe I should trademark that. Anyway, I do think it's going to become valuable to have that human certified stamp, because there are things that can happen with your content that can be lifted, and I've seen this happen, taken and put into a story that's generated by AI, posted by some nefarious business around the world, a negative story, a false story, and they hold you ransom to get that story taken down. And it's scary, but that is happening more and more. And once somebody hears that they paid the ransom, it's like it happens again and again. So it's an interesting time. And AI, I think is a beautiful assist, but I don't think it will ever replace the strategic thinking and the problem solving of a human being.
Great. Let's stick to that theme a little bit. It actually segues into the next really segment I wanted to talk about. You mentioned the human element, the human touch, if you will. I really love what you're describing there, Karolyn. Let's also talk about authenticity a little bit. I think, April, you mentioned a little bit about people kind of posting their thoughts on X. I don't remember who else it was, but on this call, someone also mentioned posting at 8 p.m., 9 p.m., just kind of their thoughts out there. Let's suppose you're talking to an executive of a Fortune 500 company, and there might be a growing sentiment where everyone's pushing for an authentic version of themselves, being unfiltered, kind of saying what goes. The opposite side of this coin might be a little bit more structured, a more professionally crafted message strategy a little bit. What would you say to this executive? And it's almost like kind of advocating for public relations and the effect that it has. What would you say if you were sitting one-on-one with the CEO, April?
So the question is, should the CEO be more authentic and out there, let it all hang out, versus but being more traditionally professional?
More or less. Yeah.
How much personality should they reveal? I mean, I am always a fan of, you never want your spokesperson to appear robotic and like they're just repeating talking points. So when we're working with the CEO, we're always trying to uncover, stories that they can tell, anecdotes, personal information. I think that's always helpful in shaping a story. I think it can go too far, obviously. And, and certain executives won't be comfortable talking about their kids or, their lifestyle or their 5 homes or whatever it may be. And I think some of that is a generational thing. I'm Gen X and I'm not comfortable posting every detail of my life like perhaps a millennial or Gen Z would be. But so I think it's a balance, honestly. You want to be careful. You don't want your shareholders or your investors to be uncomfortable if you reveal too much about yourself and, you're off, for example, I know people have gone on Joe Rogan to use this example and smoke pot. That may not be the best image for your company. So unless maybe you're in a cannabis company. So I do think you'll want to rely on your counsel, your PR folks to help you develop those authentic stories, but also perhaps to put some guardrails there.
Well, how about actions, April? If I can just add to this, because all I kept thinking is the alignment between the leader, right? The leader of the organization, the CEO, and the company brand. And what came to mind immediately was Elon Musk with Twitter. What happened to Tesla's stock, right? So I think that you are right. I love it when people are a little more open and, you can get that human feel to them, but they have to also understand that they're representing a brand, and is what they're about to say or the stand that they're going to take on some sort of a political situation or a crisis, is it aligned with their brand values? So again, it has to be strategic. It has to be thoughtful. It can't be on the fly.
Love that. Jason, any thoughts? And then we're going to move on to the Q&A portion.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in authenticity in everything we do. So, our leadership should be authentic. So should our communication. The only exception I would say is, you've got to consider the audience. And as my colleagues pointed out here so well, and I was just quoted recently in an article about this idea, but, if your company's going to take a political stance, you're going to alienate probably half of your potential customers, depending on where your brand is. If your brand is aligned with, more liberal thinking or more conservative thinking, then I would double down on that if that's, where you're going and who your true buyers are. But if you're more of a neutral, you sell potato chips to everybody or groceries to everybody, I don't know that that's a safe place to be. I also sense, and this is just anecdotal, about half of the consumers don't want companies to take a political position at all. They just want to buy their goods and let them do their own thing. It's a little bit of a generational thing or a preference. So some people are very much interested in a company's political views. So I feel like you're going to alienate half your audience no matter what you do. And half of them don't even want you to have that position anyway. So I think it's a little bit risky to take political stances. And an anecdotal example would be I've owned a series of Teslas since 2016. I'm a Tesla shareholder. Do I like the things I'm seeing, the CEO do? No. But does that stop me from buying a car that I fell in love with in 2016? Does it make me want to sell my shares? They're doing okay so far, but if I was his advisor, which I would never want to be, because of the things I've heard about how hard it is to, persuade or talk any sense, whatever. And when I was quoting the article, I just said, look, here's what I would advise, but I don't think he's going to follow any of that advice, because here he is, one of the wealthiest humans on earth. And no matter what he seems to do, he still remains the wealthiest human on earth. So clearly there's no real backlash for him. It hurts me as a shareholder, right? It hurts some of his companies, but not in a way that he's feeling it in his pocketbook. And so, he's going to continue to be what I call a renegade and do things his way. And I think if we've been in this business long enough, we've all had renegade CEOs or leaders we've had to work with. And sometimes it's not a good fit and you have to say goodbye. But in my experience, eventually it catches up with them too. So
Jason, you are so a PR person. I mean, I would say your ability to label Mr. Musk as a renegade, or I think many other people just might say,
everybody has their own opinion. I'm trying not to alienate any half of my audience.
Right.
Great. Well, great, everyone. These are all really valuable and terrific insights. That concludes the general session. So what we're going to do now, to our audience members tuning in live, we're going to switch to the live Q&A portion. Two ways to do this. You could either message, if you look at the event page, submit your questions there. If you'd like, I also just posted an ability to come up on stage. So if we don't have a shy audience, they could come up and join us and ask it live. While that's happening, we already have the first few questions that were posted throughout our episode here, and some before the show too. I'm going to read the first one now. It says, my question is, as a startup, should we focus any attention on PR? I ask because with resources limited, should we even care about what the public thinks about us? And anyone could
You're
take
asking
this.
3 PR people that question. I would say if you want to grow your business, if you want to attract funding, if you want to get customers, I would say PR is very important.
Well, even your presence online, right? So some things that you might not think of as PR, we automatically now integrate into our workflow for new clients, making sure your Google business profile is up to date, making sure that it's verified, having a Bing presence on the internet, having that business page. I mean, these are things that might have been assigned to an administrative person at some point, but now they give you the opportunity to create a post, put photos up. So it influences the image of your company And that's free, and it doesn't take that long to do. So I wouldn't dismiss things that I would consider low-hanging fruit to improve your PR.
LinkedIn for sure as well.
Oh my God, yeah.
And LinkedIn will index as high as any top news outlet because of the traffic that site gets. So if someone's Googling you, your LinkedIn page is going to come up often before your own website. So
you're right. Yeah. And I just got 2 new business leads from an article I wrote on LinkedIn. So I know it works. Yeah.
Well, you're right. I mean, all social media platforms have really high domain authority. So, and often higher than, second, third, or fourth tier media outlets, and and often as high as a tier 1 news outlet's domain authority. So that's going to rank higher on the search engine, especially from an element of freshness. But to present the contrarian viewpoint, Mark Cuban is pretty famous for saying that he doesn't believe any startup company should ever hire a PR firm. And, I've actually directed a comment at him when he's posted that and just said, maybe PR firms shouldn't work with startup companies because they're notoriously, high expectations, low investment, and often, unstable or unreliable in those early days, where it actually puts a PR firm vulnerable, just as Mark Cuban was making the point that it can make your startup company vulnerable. I think the biggest mistake, first of all, excellent feedback from the panel here, is that there's a lot you can do yourself, right? And PR has expanded beyond, any way a corporation or company communicates, in my opinion, belongs under the umbrella of PR or corporate communications, not necessarily marketing. And I think when you use it as a marketing channel is when you actually end up alienating a lot of your audience. So that's just my 2 cents. That's our, philosophy and position at Axia. But ultimately, there's a lot of things you can do on your own for PR. You could also hire what's called a solo PR firm or a moonlighter or somebody who has a side hustle in PR. Just make sure they've got the right credentials and they're not as equally qualified as you might be to just do it yourself. But the other thing I find is that sometimes an entrepreneur might be a specialist or a technician. They're launching a new company and they don't want to do sales. So they think, let me hire a PR firm or let me hire a marketing person, and that will make up for that gap. But you'll never be able to make up for the gap of not having somebody actively selling your product. And I've seen startup businesses be like, I can't afford to employ myself full-time. I've got to keep my full-time job. So I'll hire a PR firm so that they can go out there and get visibility for me so I can then work in my company. And I just think that's the wrong approach also. So I think at the end of the day, if you can't afford to be employed by yourself, it might be difficult for you to employ a PR firm on your behalf. And so PR firms are not necessarily inexpensive. You're going to pay for the level of sophistication. You're going to pay for the quality of the work. So I would try to find somebody you could convince to at least do a side hustle with you initially to help you get from point A to point B, and then go from there. But my colleagues are right. PR is content, search and optimization, social media, and so much more.
Good advice, Jason.
And we have just about 2 minutes remaining. I do see a question that's coming from a good colleague and friend of mine. And this was actually funny enough addressed a little bit earlier, but it says, is there no such thing as bad PR? I don't know who mentioned no PR, et cetera, but we'll do maybe a blitz of answers here with the remaining time that we have. Karolyn, we'll start with you. We'll go to April, and then we'll finish up with Jason.
There can be bad PR, and it can cost you business. So, it's one thing to have your name in the news, but it's another thing to have your name in the news next to something, let's say, like FBI investigation or fraud and persuasion, something that, my God, hopefully it's inaccurate, right? Hopefully it's incorrect. But those kinds of situations, and people love bad news and dirt, so it grows and flows, and then you have to work really hard to demonstrate a good side or a positive piece, and that's why crisis PR counseling is so important before there's a crisis.
April?
Yes, I agree with Karolyn. There obviously is such thing as bad PR and or bad news coverage, and anybody that's been canceled knows this. So, I mean, unless you're the president of the United States, he seems to have gotten a wealth of coverage on all sides and managed to continue to be successful. Yeah, Teflon sort of thing. But very few of us are Teflon, and so yeah, I would certainly be careful. We always work with clients to plan news stories, news announcements in advance. We look at what negative outcomes could arise. What are some negative questions you may want to prepare for that a reporter could ask. If the time is wrong, now might be the wrong time, for example, to announce a DEI program at your company, just because of the backlash that's been taking place. Not to say you shouldn't do that, but it may not be the time to put it in the news. So, we can advise you on, the right timing. If there is bad news, when to put that out. Sometimes that's a Friday afternoon sort of thing.
No, we would never advise a client to send out news when no one's paying attention, right?
Well, only if it's something that could be negative. So, work with strategic counsel, but no, not all publicity is good.
Great. And Jason, just maybe we have 20 seconds if you want to take the remaining time.
I want to side with my colleagues. They're exactly right here. I just did a couple quick Google searches, and P.T. Barnum is the person who first said there's no such thing as bad publicity, so consider that source. And then our current president, who I'll just call again, renegade, do it their own way, right? He's known to say there's no such thing as overexposure. And so I think at the end of the day, you have to consider again, what camp you fall into. If you just want to be talked about all the time, whether it's good or bad, then you need to talk to your, communications and PR advisors up front about your position and see if they agree with it. I guarantee there's somebody out there who offers similar services that we do that may be more or less sophisticated in their approach, and be all about that. I would say if I were you, I would use the keyword publicist when you're out there looking for somebody who's just going to get you whatever kind of coverage they want to get, whether it's strategic or not, whether it alienates your audience or not. And that's the difference, I think, between a trusted advisor and a sophisticated PR advisor, is they're going to guide you through those decisions, where stereotypically a publicist is somebody just looking for any publicity they can find anywhere, even if it doesn't move the needle for you or influence the right audience for you.
Great. Well, that concludes our session. Thank you so much to our 3 expert panelists. And to our audience, thank you for being terrific as well. Our audience members always receive Starbucks gift cards, so you'll be getting that in the post-event email. There's also going to be a post-recording email, and if you need to get in touch with any of our experts, you'll have their information and contact information provided if you need to get in touch with them directly. We'll wrap it up here. Happy Friday, everyone. Have a great weekend. And let's make sure we put out the right kind of press and PR for ourselves out there.
There we go.
Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Ray.
So much, everybody.
Thank you, Ray, April, Carolyn. Appreciate it. It's nice
you
to
guys
meet
are
everybody.
great.